Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. I hope you're having a great day. My name is Eric and I'm glad you can make it because today we are going to be shaking things up a little bit as we begin a discussion on what is quite possibly the most debated and controversial topic in this craft that we all love called charcuterie. That's right, we're going to be talking about whether or not curing salts are actually necessary to produce a safe and edible product. And so I want you to stick with me through this episode as we're going to cover a lot of information. We're going to talk about what curing salts are, what they do, how they work, and then most importantly, we're going to talk about whether or not they are actually necessary. All right, so before we begin, I just want to say thank you to all of you who wrote to me, personally and in the comment section requesting this video. I've been wanting to make this video for the last couple of years, and you guys gave me the push to finally do it today. And the reason we're doing it is because there is a lot of very, very dangerous and bad information on YouTube. And I can't tell you how many emails I get a week from people who followed other YouTubers' recipes and have either gotten sick or have shown me pictures of some highly questionable charcuterie, and I don't want that to happen to you today. And so by the end of this video, you're going to have the knowledge to determine without a shadow of a doubt whether or not using curing salts in your charcuterie is right for you. Let's begin. Okay, so what are curing salts? Well, the history of curing salts is absolutely fascinating and can be dated back all the way to the ancient Egyptians. We're talking 5,000 years. They would mine the salt, they would use it in their curing application, and their food would last much longer. And they may or may not have known that the salt that they were mining was not pure salt. It actually had impurities. And one particular impurity that was in their salt was something called potassium nitrate. You may recognize potassium nitrate by a completely different name, and that is saltpeter. It's one of the main ingredients in gunpowder. But when you take potassium nitrate and you mix it with salt and you add it to meat, it makes the meat safe to eat. And this was later discovered by the Chinese, the Spaniards, the Italians, the Peruvians, the French, so on and so forth. But the problem with potassium nitrate is that it never really created a consistent product. And so around the late 60s, early 70s, scientists got together to create a substitution, and they came up with sodium nitrite and sodium nitrate. And so today when we talk about curing salts, we're generally referring to two different products, Instacure number 1 and Instacure number 2, right? Prog powder number 1 and Prog powder number 2. You get the idea. The one version of the curing salts is regular table salt mixed with a little bit of sodium nitrite. The 2 version of curing salts is regular table salt mixed with sodium nitrite and sodium nitrate in very, very small quantities. And both of these products are used differently to cure meats. Curing salts have 3 functions. The first and absolute most important function of curing salts is to inhibit the growth of unwanted bacteria, specifically Clostridium botulinum. Now that's the bacteria that causes botulism. If you're unaware of Clostridium botulinum, it is the most lethal and dangerous food bacteria on the planet. Fun fact, did you know that in the 10th century, a Byzantine emperor, Leo the Wise, prohibited the manufacturing or the production of certain sausages because of how many people were dying from eating them? Then in the late 1700s, another outbreak occurred in Germany, which motivated a young physician by the name of Justin Kerner to successfully document and publish detailed descriptions of this disease and its symptoms. He actually called it sausage poisoning. Soon after that, this sausage poisoning disease became known as botulism, stemming from the word botulus, which is the Latin word for sausage. Coincidentally enough, about 80 years after Justin Kerner's work was published, this pathogen was actually discovered, and it bears a striking resemblance to sausage. But I digress. Clostridium botulinum thrives in an anaerobic environment, and what that simply means is that this particular bacteria tends to grow really well in low oxygen or no oxygen environments. And I gotta tell you, this bacteria is incredibly fascinating. If spores are found on your food and the conditions aren't right for it to grow, it'll form a membrane or a protective shell or armor, if you will, and literally hibernate until the conditions are right for it to grow. The spores of this deadly pathogen can be found all over the place. Fruit, vegetables, soil, water, seafood, meat. I mean, it's everywhere. And for the most part, it's completely harmless, unless the growing conditions are optimal. In which case, this harmless spore will start to produce neurotoxins, which can cause paralysis, basically destroy your nervous system and your brain. Yeah, it's not good. But on a more positive note, this deadly toxin does seem to be an interestingly popular wrinkle remover. Have you ever wondered what Botox stood for? Botulinum toxin. Okay, so adding curing salts inhibits the growth of unwanted bacteria. Check. It also preserves the color. And although the process of preserving the color is pretty scientific, the long and short of it is this. As soon as you add curing salts, they begin to break down through a conversion process that happens microbiologically and end up as a gas known as nitric oxide. That particular gas bonds itself to a protein in the meat called myoglobin, and it keeps it from getting oxidized. So there you go. It preserves that beautiful pink color, and I think that's kind of a byproduct of curing salts. And the third function, and I really think this is more of a byproduct, much like the color situation of adding curing salts to your meat, comes down to flavor. Adding curing salts will give your meat a distinctly hammy flavor, which some people like and some people don't. And finally, let's talk about whether or not curing salts are even safe. And I gotta admit, this is a hot topic, and there's a lot of myths. There's a lot of fear and misconceptions about curing salts, primarily because of a 50-year-old flawed study and lots of misinformation. Okay, let's dispel some myths. First and foremost, nitrates and nitrites by themselves are not cancer-causing. So let's just throw that one out the window. Matter of fact, nitrates and nitrites, which are the curing agents in curing salts, are naturally occurring chemicals found all throughout nature. You can find them readily available in celery, carrots, beets, cabbage, kale, spinach, lettuce, things like that. And it's no exaggeration to say that over 80, possibly even 90% of the nitrates and the nitrites that you consume on a daily basis come from the vegetables that you eat. Another interesting place where you will find nitrites is in your bloodstream and in your saliva. And I find it interesting that your body will store up nitrites in your saliva to help fight off bacteria in your mouth and in your stomach. Also, what I find fascinating is that the chemical formula for naturally occurring nitrite is NO2. And the chemical formula for synthetically produced nitrite that you find in your curing salts is NO2. And so molecularly, there is absolutely no difference between naturally occurring nitrites and synthetically produced nitrites. Their chemical formulas are identical. So if the nitrites that are in curing salts are the same as the nitrites that are in nature, then why is it considered poisonous? And that's a great question. And here's the answer. When you buy curing salts, you're actually getting it in a much more concentrated form than you would find in nature. And so when you buy curing salts, you've been given a responsibility of knowing how to use it correctly. I mean, let's face it, just about anything that you have, when used incorrectly, could be possibly harmful, dangerous, and or deadly. Have you ever heard of something called hypernatremia? If you get hypernatremia, you're likely to experience seizures. It could possibly put you into a coma and could possibly lead to death. Hypernatremia is something that happens when you eat too much salt. So even salt can be a poison if used incorrectly. So if you understand curing salts and how to use them, you don't have anything to worry about. And I've actually got 2 other videos dedicated to curing salts, how to use them, when to use them, so on and so forth. And I'll put a link in the description box if you want to check those out. All right, now that you know what it is, what curing salts do, and how they work, it's now time to answer the question. Are curing salts necessary when making your sausages or your dry cured products? And before we answer this question, I just want you to know that I don't take any of this lightly. I've dedicated over 10 years of my life to this extraordinary craft, not only to research, but also to the actual production of meats and sausages. And I bear an extraordinary responsibility as a tutorial YouTube channel to instruct people on how to safely do this at home. And I can guarantee you that if you follow any of my recipes that I have on YouTube, you will produce a safe product. And so if you're into sausages, if you're into meat preservation or cured meats, and you really want to turn this thing that we call charcuterie into a hobby that's not only fun but rewarding for your entire family, do me a favor, click that subscribe button and that notification bell right now. We have a load of information on this channel that is perfect for the beginner, but also for the more advanced salami maker. And if you follow my tutorials, you will probably not run into the same mistakes I did. And after it's all said and done, if you have any questions or any problems, you can always leave me a comment or send me an email, because I am here to help. All right, so let's get to the answer. Are curing salts necessary for your sausages or your dried cured meats? Well, the easy answer is no and yes, because it really all depends on what you're making. You see, we can't talk about the necessity of curing salts without talking about foodborne illnesses. And don't get me wrong, I love salt. Salt is good and it makes for an excellent preservative. But you would need at least 10% salt in your recipe to prevent the germination of botulism spores. And I don't know if you've ever tried to eat something that had a 10% salt content. It is unedible. All right, so with all that information out there and the knowledge that nitrates and nitrites, when used correctly, are safe food additives, if there was even a fraction of a percentage that I could produce an unsafe product because I only chose to use salt, and I were to feed that to my wife, my child, or my friends and get them sick, I don't think I could live with myself. Now, the good news is that not all forms of charcuterie, right? Not all forms of sausage and dry cured meats require curing salts. And I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that there are some sausages and some dry cured meat products where if you use only salt, you can sleep easy knowing that they are 100% safe to eat. And I guess you're asking, what's the difference? So the difference in whether something needs a curing salt or whether you can just use regular salt comes down to how it's prepared. And what I do is typically recommend the use of curing salts if you plan on making a sausage or a dry cured meat product where the conditions are right to grow these harmful bacteria. Okay, so what are the conditions that need to be present in order for harmful bacteria to grow? Well, there's roughly 5 or 6 conditions that need to be present, but for the purpose of this video, I've oversimplified it, and I'm going to give you 2 conditions. Consider this a 2-point checklist. And both conditions have to be met in order for you to consider using a curing salt. If only one condition is met and the other one is not, you can use only salt and it will be 100% safe to eat. If both conditions are met, then whatever you're making, whether it's a sausage or a dry cured product, you need to know that that particular product is going to fall into a high-risk category of being extremely dangerous if it happens to have any of these foodborne pathogens in it during the process. All right? So just remember, 2 conditions, both have to be met in order for you to consider using curing salts. The first condition is temperature. Will your meat be left in the danger zone temperature for longer than 2 hours? And for the purpose of charcuterie, we're going to define the danger zone temperature as 37 Fahrenheit to 140 Fahrenheit. All right? So that temperature range we're going to call the danger zone. Is your meat going to be hanging within that temperature range for longer than 2 hours? If it is, you've satisfied the first requirement of the conditions that we're talking about. The second condition is, have you created a low oxygen or no oxygen environment? If you have, you satisfied the second requirement. And remember, if you satisfied both requirements at the exact same time, your sausage or dry cured meat is now in the high risk category of developing a foodborne pathogen. All right, let me give you some examples of each condition so that you can have a better idea of what I'm talking about, and hopefully it'll clear up any questions that you might have. The first condition is pretty obvious. It's about temperature. If your meat is going to be hanging in the danger zone temperature, which is 37 to 140 Fahrenheit for longer than 2 hours, you have satisfied that requirement. This particular condition applies to cold smoking, applies to cooking at very low temperatures. This condition will generally apply to all salami and all dry cured meat products. Pretty simple, right? The second condition is about low oxygen or no oxygen environments, because remember, some of these foodborne pathogens require no oxygen to thrive. And so the moment you create a no oxygen environment, you create a place that is hospitable. I mean, this is a friendly environment for that spore to start producing neurotoxins. So this condition applies to 100% of all sausages that use ground meat. Remember, the moment you grind your meat and stuff it into a casing, you've now created a no oxygen environment. And whatever bacteria you might have picked up, whether it's from your hands, from your equipment, from your grinders, from your stuffer, from your mixer, is now inside of your sausage in a no oxygen environment, which is the perfect place for it to start growing. Another place you will find a low oxygen or no oxygen environment is a smoker or a smokehouse. And I realize that not all smokers are the same. The smoker that I particularly use produces a very low and at times no oxygen environment, but other smokers may have more airflow through them. One little test you could do to determine whether or not your smoker is a low oxygen or no oxygen environment is light your smoker up and go ahead and put a candle inside your smoker and leave it in there for about 30 minutes. After 30 minutes, check to see if that candle is still lit. If it's still lit, there's a good chance you have enough oxygen running through your smoker where this condition won't apply. But if it is out, then your smoker is a low or no oxygen smoker, and you can pretty much check that one off your list. All right, let's look at some actual sausages or some dry cured meat products and compare those to our two conditions and see how they stack up. Now remember, both conditions have to be met. If at any time one condition is not met, we can toss that out. It is no longer high risk and you can only use salt. But if both conditions are met, it becomes a high risk piece of charcuterie and the chance of growing some sort of a foodborne pathogen becomes a lot greater. All right, so let's take a look at fresh sausages. Fresh sausages are typically ground meat stuffed into a casing and then refrigerated and cooked. So let's stack that up against the conditions. The first condition is, will our fresh sausage be in the danger zone temperature for longer than 2 hours? And the answer is no. Fresh sausages are usually never in that temperature for longer than 2 hours. So we immediately cross that condition off. And so that means that fresh sausages are not a high-risk sausage. You can only use salt and feel safe about not getting anyone sick. Let's talk about salami. Salami is a ground meat product that's stuffed into a casing and generally hung in temperatures that are between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit for 3 to 6, sometimes 8, 10 weeks. How does that stack up against our conditions? Well, the first condition, will it be in the danger zone for more than 2 hours? Absolutely. We could check that condition. Generally, salami hangs in the danger zone temperature for many weeks. The second condition is, have we created a low or no oxygen environment? And we can check that one off as well, because the minute we grind our meat and stuff it tightly into a salami casing, the inside of that salami casing becomes a low oxygen or no oxygen environment. Since both of those are checked, salami becomes a high-risk piece of charcuterie that has the potential of growing a foodborne pathogen. So when it comes to salami making, it is advisable to use curing salts, because salt alone will not kill the pathogens that could possibly grow. Let's move on to another example. Let's talk about whole muscle dry curing. Whole muscle dry curing is incredibly popular. You've got prosciutto, you got pancetta, you got guanciale, bresaola, you got lonzino, capicola. Matter of fact, we just did a video on capicola. If you want to see that, you can check that link right there. All right, so how does dry curing whole muscles stack up against our two conditions? Well, the process of making dry cured whole muscles starts with curing your whole muscle. Once the muscle is cured, it's then hung to dry in a temperature range that's between 50 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So as far as dry cured muscles go, the first condition, check, it's met. And the second condition is, have we created a low or no oxygen environment? And when it comes to whole muscles, the answer is no. Remember, the whole muscle has not been contaminated with any kind of foreign bacteria. It is, in essence, sterile. Now, unless your butcher has stabbed it or punctured it with a knife, introducing foreign bacteria, if the muscle was butchered properly and it's completely intact without any major puncture wounds or gashes, then it is completely sterile. And because it is hung to dry in an area where air is moving around it constantly, that condition doesn't apply. So we can cross that off the board. Therefore, when dry curing whole muscles, only salt is necessary. Now, if you want to add curing salts, that is completely up to you. It will elevate the flavor and it will give it a nice pink color, but it is not necessary. Now, let me throw you a curveball. What if you wanted to take your whole muscle and cold smoke it, or smoke it at a very low temperature, like bacon or cold smoked capicola? Well, you have to reevaluate your conditions. The first condition is still going to apply because it's going to remain in very low temperatures for a very long time. But the second condition you have to take a closer look at, because the moment you put it in your smoker, you're now introducing it to a low or no oxygen environment, in which case it becomes a high-risk piece of charcuterie. So if you're going to cold smoke your dry-cured mussels, or if you're going to smoke at low temperatures your whole mussels like pork belly, that becomes high risk, and the use of curing salts is absolutely advised. All right, I think that wraps up today's video, and I really appreciate you sticking around to the very end with me. And if you have any questions about what we talked about today, or if you would like further clarification about a specific meat project you're working on, leave them in the comment section below, and I'll be happy to give you a straightforward and honest answer. If you found today's video helpful or entertaining in any way, blast that thumbs up button. It's always appreciated. And if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing and clicking that notification bell. We post new videos each week, and we have got a heck of a sausage series right around the corner. I don't want you to miss it. Thanks for being here. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.